find the second one to be more difficult, no problem. I've dug up a couple of examples that hopefully will be helpful, but we can tackle either one. I imagine the first one hopefully will tickle your fancy a bit more. All right, so who wants to get us started? How can we engage in the world politically, and that includes how you engage just in general in society while maintaining humility, mercy, and peace? Maybe when it comes to political dialogue, how do you do that? How do you balance those two things? Who wants to get us started? And I've noticed when I sit down, it forces you guys to shift and think that it's your turn to talk. So that's what I'm going to do. So how do we do that? Yes, Monica. Peter, Mina. Someone run over here with a microphone for Monica. Mina, let's move a little quicker, my friend. No, it's all right. Right up here, front row. Yes, Monica. It's off. Amazing. All right. So I guess you're not using the microphone? You can project. All right. There you go.
I don't have to. It's okay. Okay. I was just thinking that with how polarized politics has become,
Yeah.
it's hard to engage in fruitful discussions that actually, like, people walk away actually thinking about what the other side had to say instead of just thinking, yeah, well, I'm right and you're wrong and X, Y, Z. Like, people just want to dog on the other side just because, like, it's the other side, instead of actually trying to convince them of something. And it kind of made me think about, even in our faith, sometimes we're getting into discussions with people of different, who are like evangelical or they're atheists or whatever, and it ends up sometimes becoming about winning the argument instead of winning the person. And so I kind of think as a Orthodox Christian, we should be kind of going into these discussions with a similar mindset, where it's like, it's not about winning the argument or making the other person walk away feeling bad. It's about, even if you don't win them over, because I know politics it would take a lot to win someone over with how it's been today, but at least planting the seed, or just at least them seeing, maybe they don't agree with what you're saying, but they can at least appreciate how you're not having the discussion the way other people would who maybe aren't Christian.
Okay, excellent. Great start. Thank you. Bryce.
Part of it is remembering that God is your priority, and that if you cannot have a political dialogue while staying humble, while, not slandering the other side or slandering politicians, you're not ready to have political dialogue. And you need to focus more on your walk with Christ, because, again, that's your priority. That's your number one.
Excellent. Very good. Love it. The youth voice is speaking up, and I'm loving it. Any other thoughts on this? I guess nothing to add after that. Come on, guys. All right. Does anyone have any thoughts on the second question? Yes, Monica.
Paul.
Okay. Can you explain?
Well, if he's one of your examples, I don't want to take it.
No, go.
If he's one of
It's
your
all good.
examples. Or Peter, like when he was in prison and he would still, like, I think in general when we see these people who their gift from God was their voice and using it to, like, evangelize, and how even when they were threatened and things like that with their lives, and like Peter, what a brutal way that he was killed. Like he on the cross upside down, and he didn't stand down. Like, and they've been, things like, and being thrown in prison, things like that. Like, but they didn't stop writing. They didn't stop preaching. I think that's very political.
Okay. Excellent. Good. Other thoughts? Yes. Pass the mic.
I don't know how to explain it, but I think
Can you
Pope Carolus was also
say again? Pope Carolus?
Carolus. I mean, I don't really know, like, how to explain what he did, but, like, just knowing what he's been through and everything in Egypt, I think Pope Kyrillos kind of is a good example of that.
Okay, excellent, very good. So those who don't know, Pope Kyrillos kind of, I think the way he approached it is he developed a relationship with the president, and I think he sought to have a non-antagonistic relationship. And the other side of it, which I think was probably not probably, was certainly the more powerful aspect of it, is he had a really deep relationship with God, and he's a man of prayer. And so, yeah, I think Pope Kyrillos is not one that I had thought about, but he's definitely a great example as well. Yes, back here, Martha. Okay, all right, fair enough. Any other thoughts on this one?
For the examples, I think I remember there is one of the Coptic Orthodox priests in 1919 in Egypt who supported Saad Zaghloul at the time, and he is the one who led Thawra Sha'biya, led people in the streets, and he put his hand with the sheikh at the time, and they put the sign of the cross and the half moon that that was a time where Christian really made a point, and they were united in front of the British.
Like the British Imperial State?
Correct.
Okay, okay. That's beyond my Egyptian history knowledge. Yeah, please do. Yeah, I love world history. Yes. Any other thoughts on this? All right, we'll do one more. Bryce, behind you.
I think a good example, I mean, he's not Orthodox,
Yeah.
But a good example would be Martin Luther King Jr. He made sure that whatever he did in relation to his movement never violated his relationship with God.
Mm.
He knew what boundaries to set, he knew what to say. And when there was a church that would refuse people of African American descent, he didn't slander them, he didn't shame them, but he told them that he stood by the Lord and said that you need to change your ways and accept everybody because God made these people.
Excellent. Good. All right. I love it. All right, let's get started. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Number of these people we're going to be talking about the coming weeks. One of them will be certainly MLK. Desmond Tutu is another one. Pope Shenouda certainly we'll be looking at over the next couple of weeks today as well. Today we're going to be looking at other people who impacted the world around them, the likes of Queen Esther, Constantine, and Prince Vladimir in the 11th century in Kiev. So today, though, I want us to look and do a little bit deeper dive into how do we've been talking about over the last number of weeks. Last week we spoke about what kind of values we should be looking at and how this idea that every person is created in the image of God, how that impacts our social ethics, our political ethics, okay? And we spoke about how that impacts how we treat and extend justice to people and mercy, and we seek righteousness with our engagement in the world. That impacts whether, on the topic of life, whether it's the unborn when we speak about abortion, it's the elderly when we speak about euthanasia, it's war when we look at what's going on in the rest of the world. I think sometimes we are selectively pro-life depending on which issue of these most directly rises to the surface with us. I know a lot of people, they're like, well, we should be pro-life and that's why we should be out of war. And others really clearly the end of life euthanasia issue rises to the surface. And of course, the big one that comes up for most folks is the topic of abortion and protecting the most vulnerable of them, the unborn. But I think we have to be non-selective in how we carry out and engage with our political positions in the world. We need to be consistent and have some sort of value system that's based on the gospel that drives and directs our engagement in the world. Otherwise, what will happen is we will fall into the trap of political idolatry, which is what we spoke about a couple weeks ago, okay? And so if we understand that Christ is above all, that his banner reigns high, and it's he who we bend the knee to, and that he's the one that we should be seeking first, then everything else should flow from that point, that central point. Today, we want to speak about how is it that we as Orthodox Christians can engage as servant leaders in the world. Some of you may at some point be called into civil service as elected officials. Some of you are already attorneys practicing in the legal system. Others of you are engaged in service in the world, whether it's with nonprofits that seek to do good. And many of you who are physicians are already seeking ways that you can extend yourselves in the world doing good. Hopefully, what we talk about today can touch each and every part of your life. And you can think about whether you kind of intersect with some of those examples that I gave, or maybe you're a teacher, you're a computer engineer, or something else, a realtor, a pharmacist, an educator. You can think about how do these values, how we engage in the world, how does this land where you're at? We have convinced ourselves, unfortunately, maybe it's because that's what the world has told us, maybe it's because it's what we've observed with our eyes, that elected officials are just worldly, and so we should expect unethical, corrupt behavior from them. We've convinced ourselves when we are going to vote, we just say, well, you know, we're not voting for the Pope, and so if we were voting for the Pope, it'd be different, right? And so we've convinced ourselves that our elected officials not just are unethical, but that they should be unethical, and that's just the way the world is. I'm convinced, though, that the church must maintain its prophetic voice, which means at some point, you may or will have an opportunity to interact with some of these people, and your primary role there in engaging with them is not to fawn at their feet, not to give them platitudes about how great they are, but it's to maintain that prophetic voice of the church, calling justice and righteousness and mercy in their execution of policies, okay? And for those who will step into those roles, those are things that we need to be reminded of as well. What does it mean for you to lead in the world today? What does it mean for you to engage in the world today? And I think the essential term that we should be thinking about today is servant leadership. Servant leadership. I'm going to make it simple. I'm going to give you 3 characteristics of servant leadership that you should be thinking about, whether it's in your homes, with your children or your spouses. It's here at church in the service, it's at work, or it's in the world where you engage in civil society. These 3 characteristics, I think, are crucial and important for the body of Christ to engage in this way. The first one is that we are called to serve others. We are called to serve. We are called to lay down ourselves for the sake of the world that we live in. Leadership is not about putting ourselves above others. It's about coming under the feet of another. And a lot of times people use the right language. Oh, I'm just here to serve. I'm here to do what is for the common good, right? We as Copts have perfected and mastered the language of humility. Oh, I'm under your feet, whatever you need, right? We've mastered this language. But the question is it simply language and words that we use? Or is it a mind and a heart that is really seeking to serve the other, to extend ourselves to the other? Matthew chapter 20, verse 20 to 28, the mother of Zebedee's sons come to Christ with her sons, kneeling down in humility and asking something from him. She came to Christ and said, give me something, right? Give me something that's going to be great for my boys. He said to her, "What do you wish?" She said, "Grant that these two sons of mine may sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left, in your kingdom." Jesus answered, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink, to be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They said to him, "We are able." So he said to them, "You will drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and my left is not mine to give, but it is for those whom it is prepared by my Father." And when the 10 heard it, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. Isn't that so exemplary of what we see in the world? People are always going and asking for something for themselves and their people. And when that happens, it causes a rift between people. It causes conflict and division between people. When we go and we simply want something for me and my people, then it causes division and displeasure within the community. And that is as true in the church as it is in the world. But in verse 25, we're told Jesus called them to himself. He's seeing this division, he's seeing this displeasure, and he's seeing this, forgive me, this nepotism that the mom was trying to get at. Hey, Jesus, come on, let me get close to you, do something for my boys. This attempt at this. Jesus sees them and he says, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. Whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man came to be served, or did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Right? Saying in the world, we know how people deal. We know that the Gentiles, they lord their authority over each other. We know how emperors deal. We know how most elected officials deal. We know how leaders in churches deal. We know how leaders in the synagogue deal, he says. He says, we know that. He says, but my disciples, it shouldn't be so. With my disciples, they should do as I've done. The Son of Man came not to be served. If anyone was worthy of being served, it was Jesus Christ, God incarnate. If anyone deserved to have people washing his feet, bringing him money, throwing things at his feet, glorifying him and praising him and building buildings and statues, and it was him. And he says, I didn't come for that. Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many. And so the church doesn't come to take from society, doesn't come to take from the world. It comes to extend an offer to the world. Church is always giving because that is what Christ has done. Right? We are here to serve and to give back. Yesterday, when we went into Trenton for the homeless service, a number of people, they said, hey, we'd like, do you have any flyers? Do you have any cards? We'd like to come visit your church. We said, unfortunately, we didn't bring any flyers or cards. They said, well, how are we supposed to come to your church? I said, well, I can give you the website. And they said, well, what did you come here for then? What did you come here for then? I said, we came just to share a meal with you. Like, what do you mean? It's unfortunately all people expect. People have come to expect that in the world, you offer something and there's an expectation that you want something in return, right? Even if the expectation's a good thing, like, hey, why don't you come pray with us? Why don't you come worship with us? Why don't you come join us, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing, but the expectation was we were coming to offer something solely because we wanted them to come and join us. And quite honestly, it wasn't even on our mind, and maybe that's a good thing, that it's so far away. That we didn't even think, we're like, folks are not going to drive 35, 40 minutes from Trenton. Most of them don't have cars. They're living on the streets. Like, let's just go and extend something, right? But in the world, we've come to expect you offer because you want to receive. You give a compliment because you want a compliment. Even, forgive me, sometimes when we give in church, we give expecting, God, you're going to do this for me now. Like, we give to get. We give kindness to our spouse because we want them to be kind. We give whatever it is, like we remember our boss's birthday or anniversary, and we give them a gift because we want the boss to treat us a little bit nicer, right? We give to receive. And Christ is saying is, the Son of Man didn't come to be served. He came to serve, to offer everything, right? To offer himself for the world. And so servant leadership is not about ever thinking, what do I get out of this? It's about asking, how can I give of myself? And I know that's a high cost. I know some of you are saying, that doesn't sound really appealing or attractive. It doesn't sound super fair. It doesn't sound like something that I want to sign up for. Servant leadership, though, is about condescending. It's about lowering ourselves beneath the feet of others. Christ describes leadership as service. Leadership is service. It's diakoneia is the Greek word for it. Diakoneia is not standing in church and singing a hymn. Unfortunately, that's what we've reduced diaconate to. Diaconate is a group of men standing in church and leading a choir. That's not service, all. Right? That is an aspect of service in our liturgical service, our divine liturgy, but that's not the totality of the diakoneia that we are all entrusted with. We are all entrusted with this call to serve, just as Christ did. We're expected to serve one another, to serve the world around us, to serve our wife and our husband, to serve our children, to serve the stranger, to serve the person that irritates us, to serve the person that we disagree with politically. We are called to serve, to give of ourselves, just as Christ did. Christ calls us to reject leadership that seeks power for its own sake and embrace leadership as service to others. St. John Chrysostom, he says that the most basic Christian commandment is to love. And love is what the servant must reflect in their work, whether in the world or in politics, if you will, in family or the church. So this act of service is compelled by love. It's the most basic Christian movement of the heart is to love, is to extend ourselves and to reflect that love in the world in which we find ourselves. Show that love at work. See what God does. Show it with those who you engage with in the political arena. I don't personally think social media is the best place to do this. Someone was just encouraging me yesterday to come back on Facebook. And quite frankly, a number of you were like, no, don't do it, right? And I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know if that's the best place personally to engage in such conversations. If I do, it might be to put out verses, but even sometimes like you post a verse and people get upset. There's not a real dialogue that happens there, right? I think the best place that we can do this is in our real life, in the people that we are seeking to be in dialogue with. Hopefully this happens in our homes, right? I think Monica hit a really important point during the discussion, which is a lot of times we're not even prepared in humility to listen to the other person. We've made up our minds beforehand. When we're engaging in a conversation, it's not really a conversation, right? We're oftentimes simply waiting for the other person to stop talking so we can start talking. And we've probably tuned out the last 90% of what they've said because we've already been convinced that they're wrong. And we want to prove that they're wrong. But in servant leadership, a big part of this is listening to the other person. It's hearing the other. It's assessing the other. It's trying to understand the other. There's a really neat quote by a Christian leadership guy named John Maxwell. He says, "Seek to understand before being understood." Seek to understand before being understood. And I think that is really the heart, like a servant heart seeks to understand the person in front of them. Now, this absolutely requires humility because sometimes the person or the position that they hold is really frustrating or irritating and triggering. And so we need to kind of maintain and recover that heart of service. Saint Basil the Great, he wrote numerous letters to different emperors and elected officials. He urges rulers to lead with humility and care for their people, reminding them that their authority comes from God and should be exercised in love and justice. I've been blessed to meet numerous elected officials, both on a local, state level, on a federal level, etc. And believe me, I take opportunity to encourage them and remind them of their call to serve. Right? It's people around them, and listen, y'all, we see this in the church with bishops, as well as with elected officials. What happens is people are constantly telling leaders how wonderful they are, how they always smell like flowers. Everything is perfect and great about them. Why? Because they want to get close to what they perceive as power and authority. And so it's important, if God has placed you in a position, in a relationship with someone, that you are able to speak life to them, take that opportunity in humility and with humility. Okay? The second aspect of leadership is that leadership is about authority and self-discipline. Authority is linked to self-discipline. And this is critical. This is really important because we've been talking about serving others, right? Now we're going to understand that there is, with service comes an authority that must be coupled with self-discipline. And if that's not there, let me read this quote, and then I'll share with you a story that I recently heard. St. Gregory the theologian, he says, he who is called to lead must first master himself, for only then can he truly serve others with integrity. He who is called to lead must first master himself, for only then can he truly serve others with integrity. Yes, last time we went out to Trenton, this was a few months ago, we met this gentleman who was really broken. He had developed a very close relationship with a pastor. Pastor crossed certain lines and ended up emotionally and spiritually breaking this man. And as a result, became addicted to some really heavy drugs, and he lost hope. He lost hope in God. He lost hope in life, and he was weeping. He's like, I want to quit. I'm stuck. I'm addicted. I can't, right? And you could sense the brokenness and the shame that he had. And yet I look back and I'm like, what broke him was the encounter, the interaction he had with that pastor, with that leader, right? And so it's important, if you're in a position of leadership, whether it's at work, in society, at church, or at home, we've got to understand that we must master ourselves first before we place ourselves in a position of authority over another. Just because I'm a father or a mother, I'm not a mother, but if you're a father or a mother, right? Just because you are doesn't mean, like, sometimes we look and we say, well, I have that authority. And what St. Gregory here is saying is we must first, if we are to lead our children, we must first master ourselves. We must first master ourselves. Only then can we truly serve our children with integrity. And I'll tell you, the same holds true for me as a priest. And the same holds true for you in your place of business. And the same holds true for you if you are working in an NGO. And the same holds true for you if you're serving here at church as well, right? Saying that we have to have self-discipline and integrity in the way that we live our lives. If we are in a position of leadership, we've got to maintain that. This is the number one thing I tell every person that tells me they're running for office, is make sure that your inner life is strong. Because when you get in that place of power and authority, power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson, I always forget which one said it. Okay? So it's important, y'all, that we understand that we must master ourselves before we can really be in a position of leadership over others. Proverbs 16:12 says it's an abomination for kings to commit wickedness, for the throne is established by righteousness. The throne is established by righteousness and for righteousness. So if we are in a position of that leadership, we need to work on ourselves. It's very easy to look and find the fault and the blame in the other and just say, well, these people just don't know, and no one will know anyway. But it impacts how we serve others. It impacts how we impact others as well. All right, so spoken about, the first one was true servant leadership is about serving. It's really about serving. It's about embracing that call of the diakonia, right? To lower ourselves beneath the feet of the other, right? It's to wash the feet as Christ did. It's to serve the tables as St. Stephen and the deacons did in the book of Acts. It's to extend ourselves. It's to look around and see where the need is, and it's to fill that. The second one is about having self-discipline in our own lives. And the third one is really leadership is about leading by example. Lead by example. So easy. Talk is cheap today. Talk is so cheap. But lead by example. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 21. For we aim at what is honorable, not only in the Lord's sight, but also in the sight of man. We must have integrity in leadership. This is about living transparently and practicing what we preach. If we don't do that, our words will land on deaf ears. And yet, if we live a life of service and a life of integrity, and we lead by example, when we speak, or if and when we speak, our words will land much more powerfully. There will be meaning with what we say. You know who's the best test of when someone's lying? A little kid. Little kids can smell a lie a mile away. They're amazing. Like, I just don't know. I don't get it. Like, kids can tell when an adult is, they know, right? They know. It's that purity. They can sense it. They kind of give that side eye. They might not say it to their parent because they're afraid of their parent, but they can tell. My kids can tell when their teachers don't know what they're talking about at school. They know. They know. We can tell when elected officials that are running, and it's easy these days, they have no idea what they're talking about. Like, you can tell. You can tell. You're like, they don't know what they're saying. They don't even know what question they're being asked. Like, they don't know. And so it's important when we're engaging in the world, in this world, that we lead by example, that we say what we mean and we mean what we say. And we don't do so with being puffed up and tearing other people down. Remember, we need to approach this with the humility of a servant and the integrity of an inner life. Then when we lead by example, there will be an impact that's there. Okay? James chapter 3, verse 17 to 18 says, wisdom from above is pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits. Wisdom from above is pure. It's peaceable. So if we're going to lead by example, we want to have that purity of heart. We want to be peaceable, not looking for division and conflict all the time. As we were talking about during the discussion, people oftentimes look for ways to win the argument, and then they lose the person. Gentle and open to reason. This is important. Open not just to what someone's saying. Sometimes someone says something and you're listening to them, but you're like, that's not very rational and reasonable what's being said. Okay? And what James here is saying is, be open if there's something that's reasonable that you didn't think about, that you didn't consider before. Be open to at least listening to them, even if you, at the end, you don't agree with them. And be full of mercy and good fruit. St. Ambrose of Milan, he says, true leadership in the church or in the world begins with the soul purified by prayer, for only a soul that is close to God can lead others towards the truth. If we're really going to lead, it starts on our knees. It starts on our knees, y'all. Sometimes we're like, okay, we got to get together and make a vision plan and a vision board and vision cast, and then we got to make a plan and execute it and all that sort of stuff. And no, leadership begins on our knees. Why? Because that's where God purifies us and works in us. And if you're a parent or you have other people that report to you at work or you're serving here at church, I'm telling you, get on your knees, because you're saying, God, I need you to change me so that I can really speak what I preach. I can lead by example. I need my heart to be purified. I need to become what you are by nature. I need to become that by grace. I need your work in me to transform me. For me to be the mom that you want me to be, or the dad that you want me to be. For me to be the supervisor at work that you want me to be. For me to engage in this political toxic climate where people are fighting all the time, to be able to really listen and have a conversation. I need my heart to be purified so that really I see Christ as the most important thing. Purify my heart so that I can really live what I'm saying and lead by example. Like a lot of times we'll say that Christ is the most important thing, and then we get into a conversation and it turns into a major conflict because our hearts aren't purified. And Christ really is not the most important. Okay? All right, let me give you a couple of quick examples, and then we will wrap up. So these are some historical examples that I was just thinking about. First one that comes to mind is Queen Esther. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther, and on the second day at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom it shall be done." And Queen Esther didn't look for something for herself. She thought about those who were vulnerable, and she helped them out. She used her influence to help others who were in need, right? The second one that comes to mind is King Constantine. His leadership as the first Christian Roman Empire, he reflected this balance between ruling power and promoting faith. He famously enacted the support for the church while seeking to bring peace. He issued an edict in, I believe, the year 312 called the Edict of Milan. He made it illegal to persecute Christians at that point, or to persecute to persecute someone for their religious beliefs. And then the third person that comes to mind is the bottom of the slide up there, Prince Vladimir of Kiev in the year 1054, I think it was. Prince Vladimir, he converts and he becomes Orthodox Christian. He was the Prince of Kiev in modern-day Russia. And when he converts, he institutes these and reforms these laws that promoted education, and he built churches across his empire, if you will. Right? And he began to build hospitals and whatnot to serve more of the general population. He moved from being self-focused to thinking about the other, and understood his role as an emperor more from a Christian lens. All right? Just a couple of other quick examples for today that come to mind. I will say and acknowledge that serving in politics it's hard. It's difficult, and as many people have repeatedly said over the last numerous weeks, it's a dirty place to be. I've met few really men and women of faith in elected positions. One of the people that really stood out to me the most was a man by the name of Chris Smith. He's a congressman in the Freehold area here in New Jersey. I met him a number of years ago. He was, at the time, involved with the Helsinki Commission, which was an international religious freedom commission. And so what was going on in Egypt at the time with the persecution of Christians, he got in touch with us and we got linked up with him. And he said, hey, why don't you come down to DC? And so went down and met with him and his staff, and we were talking about just, what can be done. And he said, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? And at the very end, we're standing in his office. He wanted to show me all these different things that he had collected from visits to churches and across the world. And at the very end, he said, Father, would you please pray for me? And he bows his head, and I kind of looked around, and I said, am I allowed to do that here? And he said, if you don't do that, I can't do my job. He said, if God doesn't give me the power and the strength, I won't be able to continue doing this work. So he said, absolutely. And he bowed his head, and I looked, before I closed my eyes to pray, I looked, and it was probably one of those memorable moments that I've had in that city. Looking over his shoulder, I could see the Capitol with the flag behind it. I was like, wow, I am grateful that there are still men and women of faith in this city. And over time, I came to know a few more. So please pray for our elected officials, that they would really serve with integrity and righteousness, and not just for our cause, but they would really seek to extend mercy and justice and serve really the interests and the needs of the people that they've been elected to serve, with humility and with an awareness of God in the world. So that's just one example that comes to mind. The others that jumped out, these are just a few NGOs. I know most of you are familiar with the work that Coptic Orphans does. They do really beautiful work in the world, serving orphans, both Christians and Muslims, across Egypt that have been ravaged because of bombings and killings and just health issues that have taken the lives of parents. There's a lot of work that Coptic Orphans is doing to help those who are unable to get a basic education in Egypt. They're doing wonderful work out there. Another organization called Zoe for Life, it's an Orthodox Christian ministry that we supported a couple years back. They affirm the value of life. They provide, this is their mission statement. They said, we provide non-judgmental, confidential support and education during and after an unplanned pregnancy. It's a beautiful ministry that they offer. Zoe is Greek for life. And then the last one is World Vision that we've also been supporting. This is an organization that seeks to serve those and provide food for those who have no food in some of the most vulnerable places in the world. Where we're at, we try to do our work, but we also try to support some of the work in other parts of the world that we can't directly reach. So these are just some organizations that are seeking to serve with humility and offering and extending themselves in the world in which we live. I want to close up. I have no idea what those are. Okay. I want to close up just with a reminder that we are called to be faithful, humble, and merciful with a life of integrity in the world. And so it's easy to look at what elected officials are and aren't doing, but today I really wanted to kind of reset how we engage in the world, okay? We can sometimes influence others, but at the very least we need to begin by mastering the soul, right? And that begins when we get on our knees and allow Christ to truly become master and Lord of our soul and direct us, right? Then we will be prepared for more. Right? He'll give us not just a little, but he'll entrust us with more, and perhaps opportunity to influence and impact others, not for our own benefit, but for the sake of the kingdom and the world that God so loved that he gave his only begotten Son for. All glory be to his name forever. Amen. Any questions or comments before we wrap up? Yes, Martha.
So in like politics, when I was a little girl, it was wrong to ask who you were voting for, to the point where it's such a taboo. It is so wrong to ask. It didn't matter if you were Republican or Democrat, just vote. But that was like way before I was like 18. Now it's like, if you say you're just more conservative, people ask, so you're a Trump supporter. So like, what does that mean? Or, you hear so many like comments and it's so rude, and now it's like they want to know who you vote for so they can basically judge that you're this type of person. Is it because of maybe society's more woke, maybe because everything's more open? I don't know, because after being 18, this is kind of when it started, or will it die down because of who is running for office now? So, like you hear so much, like even like with the other side, like for example, like if like a black person's voting Republican, there are some people in the black community would be like, well, they're not black. And I'm like, it's very rude. I just hear so much. So I just wanted to get your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the question, will it die down? Who knows? I think we've got to remember there's a lot of money in politics, and so there's a lot at stake. I think there's over $1 billion in ad money that's being spent this year. So unfortunately, things have become more divisive. Is it exaggerated because of who's running? Maybe, maybe not. I guess we'll know in 4 years, right? That said, what's behind it? I mean, from my reading of it, is that people have allowed themselves to become really tribal when it comes to politics, and they've bent the knee to the most important thing is who is your political persuasion, or what is your political persuasion, or the person you're voting for. They've elevated politics to the level of faith, right? So this is what we kind of grew up with back in the 80s, right? Is that, there was someone telling me the other day that they were not allowed to, they were, one of our guys was sharing Friday night that his dad, who was a Protestant, was not allowed to talk to Catholics growing up, right? In Egypt, you were a Christian, you weren't allowed to talk to Muslims growing up, and vice versa, right? So I think what's happened now is with politics, it's been elevated to this place of, and I'm not saying that that's good, what was happening with religion back in the day. I think it's important to be able to be in the world in dialogue and encounter others, right? And if I'm confident in the one who I worship, then I can speak to anyone. And even if I disagree with them and they disagree with me, I'm okay with that. But I think people have become very dogmatic in their politics. And so that's what I mean by elevating it to the position of religious affiliation, right? Sometimes they believe something, they don't know why. And again, I will hear people on the right saying, well, people on the left do that. People on the left say people on the right do that. I see it on both sides, to be honest. It's unfortunate. when someone asks me who I'm voting for, I simply tell them the person that I push the button for when I walk in, that's who I'm going to vote for. And that's not for me to tell you. If I don't want to discuss that, I won't, right? And if I feel like I would like to discuss that, I will with people. But I don't feel compelled that I need to share that with others. Anyway, unfortunately, y'all, I think it is the time that we live in, and there will be some people who will be like, I don't want to talk to you, and I'm done with you, and okay, it's unfortunate, but okay. It is a sad reality of the time. Hopefully it doesn't turn us reactionary into that as well. Because sometimes when people do that over and over again, it can either make us feel like, well, I'm just not going to say anything at all, and I'm not even going to say that. I'm just going to tell them what they want to hear because I don't want to be in, or it turns us into like these harsh, angry people that are like, well, if they're going to do that, then I'm going to return the favor and become like that as well. And that doesn't transform us anymore into the image of Christ. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? Oh, you were kissing your hand, so I was like, what? Oh. Any other comments, questions? All right, let's pray, guys. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit.